clearly a settlement is required on all sides, and this appears also perhaps to be a slightly, it's not accidental, it could be a rather carefully choreographed exercise by the Iraqis, and the Kuwaitis and Americans are going to have to find a steady response to it.
And is there a view that Saddam definitely is up to his old tricks?
From this point of view, that's what they see, either a wily old fox or a politician who's increasingly out of control and having difficulty controlling his own people. All they can predict here is his unpredictability.
Martyn Bell, thanks very much indeed.
Other news now, and the organisers of yesterday's march against the Criminal Justice Bill, which ended in a riot in central London, have called for an inquiry into police tactics. They've described the handling of the event as incompetent and say police officers ignored the advice of march stewards. The police have blamed anarchists for starting the violence.
As traders concentrated on clearing the wreckage from Oxford Street, those involved in yesterday's violence began to apportion blame. It had been a peaceful rally to protest against the Criminal Justice Bill. An estimated 20,000 people voicing their opposition to government plans aimed at ending a suspect's right to silence and giving police greater powers to control groups such as New Age travellers. The precise moment that it degenerated into a bloody confrontation is hotly disputed. Organisers say police provoked the crowd by refusing to allow people to return to coaches. When a bottleneck built up in one corner of Hyde Park, they claim mounted police rushed in without thinking of the consequences. They're now demanding an inquiry and calling for senior officers to be disciplined.
A lower key policing approach, not forcing people to leave the park, not forcing people to rush up to that corner of the park, would have helped to diffuse the situation. A lot of people would have gone home at that point. There would have been far fewer people around, and I submit far less trouble. It was incompetent policing at that point.
Unsurprisingly, the police tell a very different story. They say officers showed remarkable restraint when faced with a barrage of weapons, including wooden staves, scaffolding, bricks, bottles and cans. 11 officers needed hospital treatment, although none was seriously injured. The officer in charge of the operation maintains that the violence was caused by a small group of around 2,000 people he described as anarchists.
We have to respond to violence with violence. If people don't actually go away, if you say, will you leave nicely? I mean, we tried to withdraw several times, and the ferocity of the attack actually increased. I mean, they were like animals chasing an injured animal. I mean, it was absolutely horrible.
Many of the 41 people charged with public order offences emerged from court today strenuously denying that they'd initiated the violence. Of those arrested, 10 people appeared before Highbury magistrates today, charged with a variety of offences, including violent disorder, affray and threatening behaviour. One man was remanded in custody. The other 9 were told to return to this court in 17 days' time. Juliet Bremner, BBC News, Highbury Magistrates Court.
Lady Thatcher has tonight commented for the first time on allegations that her son Mark made millions of pounds in commissions from an arms deal with the Saudi government. In a statement, Lady Thatcher said she was absolutely satisfied that the contract made when she was Prime Minister had been properly negotiated. Mark Thatcher has denied the allegation.
In the early 1980s, the Saudi Arabian government decided on a massive expansion of its air force. As British, American and French companies vied to clinch lucrative contracts, the then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher went to the Middle East batting for British industry. She succeeded. The Al-Yamamah agreement to supply the Saudi government with British jet fighters, naval mine hunters and ammunition was one of the biggest this century. A team of middlemen is reported to have earned more than £200 million in commission. Mark Thatcher is alleged to have been part of this team and to have earned £12 million commission himself. The Ministry of Defence denies the British government paid any commission. A 3-year investigation into the deal by the National Audit Office was not published on the grounds that it would put defence jobs at risk. The opposition wants a public inquiry.
I think it's very important we have a public inquiry to get at the truth. In particular, we need to know whether Margaret Thatcher and Mark Thatcher, between them, did break the guidance that all ministers get, which tells them that ministers shouldn't accept gifts and neither should members of their family.
The controversy came as the Prime Minister was heading for Bournemouth to try to bolster party confidence. It's the last thing the Conservatives wanted. With 60% of voters polled for a Gallup survey today saying they regard the Tories as sleazy and disreputable, the party chairman was repeatedly questioned over the Mark Thatcher affair.
We are most definitely committed to the highest possible standards in public life, and that is why I say, if anybody has any allegations, then they must put them to the proper authorities.
There's long been speculation as to how the former Prime Minister's son suddenly amassed a personal fortune. He's currently facing an American lawsuit over a company takeover and could be required to disclose the source of his riches. Tonight, Lady Thatcher issued a statement saying she was absolutely satisfied the Al Yamamah deal was properly negotiated. She was proud that it had brought thousands of jobs and billions of pounds of exports to this country. Carol Walker, BBC News.
Within the past half hour, the Prime Minister has arrived in Bournemouth for the Conservative Party conference. Mr Major, who was greeted by party workers, said he had nothing to add to Lady Thatcher's statement on the allegations surrounding Mark Thatcher. And I'm joined now from Bournemouth by our chief political correspondent, John Sargent. John, as delegates gather in Bournemouth, how great are the worries about what has become known as the sleaze factor haunting the Conservatives?
I think they are worried. The Chancellor Kenneth Clarke said today that what the trouble is that these allegations then become exaggerated and the general feelings about politicians and the public at large are affected. So I think there is concern. Obviously what they're going to try and do is stick to their agenda. The difficulty in this case is the guidance to ministers, and these are drawn up by the Cabinet Secretary, and they say that no minister nor their family can accept any gift that might appear to place them under an obligation. Now that's a very tight rule, and of course there's nothing said about how that rule should be implemented.
And do you think the latest allegations about Mark Thatcher are likely to affect his mother's reception at the Conservative conference tomorrow?
I don't think so. I suspect that she'll be asked, but I think they're putting on quite a welcome for her here tomorrow. She's going to have coffee with the Prime Minister, and I think they will treat her very much as the icon that she's become for many Conservatives. So I don't think it'll affect that. But I think behind the scenes, party managers will be worried. They've been in power a long time, and if there are allegations, any sort of allegations, particularly among people who are not directly connected with the government, nevertheless it sticks and it's difficult for them to cope with.
Very briefly, John, is it possible for the Prime Minister and his team to rise above all these allegations this week, for this to be a turning point?
I think it's going to be fairly easy for them. Remember, at party conferences, they control the agenda. All the big speeches are in their hands, and the worries they will have will be about other issues, about splits, possible splits between left and right, all sorts of other issues. I don't think this will run through the week.
John, thanks very much indeed.
Well, the Conservative conference is likely to open tomorrow with renewed calls from the party's right wing for immediate tax cuts. But the Chancellor, Kenneth Clarke, has again said there's no question of cuts until government borrowing has been reduced. He's attending a meeting of European Union finance ministers in Luxembourg that's been looking at ways of improving Europe's economies.
In the heart of Europe, the debate over British economic policy is in full flight. Here in Luxembourg, Britain's been told it's legally obliged under the Maastricht Treaty to reduce public sector borrowing. For the Chancellor of the Exchequer, it's an instruction he's happy to follow, but one that could make tax cuts problematic for a while.
You can't have tax cuts whilst you've got an excessive deficit. That's why I'm working so hard to get public spending under control, making sure borrowing isn't excessive, and then you can have tax cuts that are good for the economy and not damaging to the economy. Now, I've always said the Commission's approach is only in line with sensible Conservative policy, and I think it's those who criticise what I'm doing who have most argument with the Commission.
During the meeting, the Chancellor admitted that Britain's deficit was currently about twice the target level set out in the treaty, but he hoped recent tax increases would bring it down rapidly. If not, the Commission might want to look again at British policy.
It's a legally binding decision, so the Member State will have to see how it can implement these things. If they don't do that, the Council will have to come back to the matter and discuss with the Council in question how it can improve its performance.
In Luxembourg, this whole process is about preparing for a single currency. Although Britain is unsure about that goal, it wants to avoid the accusation that it runs a lax economy. The Chancellor's certainly making the right noises over tax for the European Commission, but that may not please his critics at the Conservative Party conference. They'd have preferred Mr Clarke to adopt a more belligerent approach. Jonathan Charles, BBC News, Luxembourg.
The time is coming up to 17 minutes past 6, and still to come, a 6 o'clock news investigation reveals drug taking and drug dealing is common in England schools, with children as young as 7 becoming involved.
The Haitian military leader, General Cedras, has announced his resignation and says he's leaving the country.
And the number of children suffering from asthma has doubled, but no one knows exactly why.
drug dealing and drug taking is common in England schools, with children as young as 7 coming into contact with drugs. These are the findings of a BBC survey of local education authorities, specially carried out for the 6 o'clock news. Of the 82 authorities that agreed to respond to the survey, 70% reported cases of pupils being offered drugs at or immediately outside school, 61% reported drug dealing between pupils, and 69% said cases of drug abuse had been reported by schools in their area. Our education correspondent, Mike Baker, reports on the drugs problem in our schools.
Vicky Cleary knows all about the tragedy of drug and solvent abuse. Her son Jamie died when he was just 16, after school friends encouraged him to experiment with solvents. For many youngsters, solvents are a first step on the path to drug abuse.
We actually found out Jamie had been abusing aerosol cans a couple of times, but he actually stopped. He decided he didn't like it and he wasn't going to do it anymore. And he hadn't done it for about 6 months prior to him dying. When he died, he'd actually tried Caligas, and it gave him a massive heart attack and killed him.
At the Newham Drugs Project in East London, they see every day the growing damage inflicted by drugs on school-age youngsters.
It's massive. It's a major problem. In some senses, you could say that by the age of 16, it's a majority sport rather than a minority one now. We've got young people down to the age of 12 that we're counselling with crack problems. We're working with primary school kids now, mainly with solvent and cannabis use, but it's something that we never thought that we'd see.
John, not his real name, is a former drug user who now works as a volunteer with the project.
I was about 13, 14. I wasn't under any pressure to take drugs. I basically enjoyed doing it at first. I started off with cannabis, moved on to LSD, speed, cocaine sometimes, not very often. All different manners, like some solvents sometimes.
Obtaining drugs is easy. In Newham as elsewhere, youngsters know just where to go. E-tablets cost £8 to £15, crack up to 20. Many dealing areas are close to schools. Nationally, 70% of education authorities we contacted said pupils had been offered drugs at or just outside school.
I didn't want to go to school. I'd rather bunk off and sit in the arcade all day.
Ian's drug problem got him expelled from school and led to crime.
I'd go out and do a bit of thieving to get some money for some drugs. All the time I'd be thinking about where I'd be getting the next money from to buy a draw for that night.
Experts say drug abuse is now so common that half of all 15 to 16-year-olds have tried an illicit substance at least once.
We found that every single school we've been into recognises that they have a drug problem there. When I started out 10 years ago, their concern was identifying young people who are beginning to use drugs in their early teens. Now, many of them say their concern is identifying who's dealing the drugs in the school. So the problem has escalated to that level.
The BBC survey suggested that drug abuse is not confined to the inner cities. Many rural and suburban education authorities also reported problems. The responses suggested a wide range of drugs is being used, including ecstasy, LSD and amphetamines. But most common is cannabis, which many authorities said is being tried by children as young as 7. Mike Baker, BBC News.
And tomorrow, Mike Baker reports on the action being taken in the fight against drugs in schools.
Haiti's military leader, Lieutenant General Raul Cedras, has announced his resignation. He also said he would leave the country. Cedras has ruled Haiti for 3 years, since the 1991 coup that overthrew President Jean-Bertrand Aristide.
Demonstrators chanting anti-Cedras slogans paraded through central Port-au-Prince from early morning. For them, this day has been a long time coming. For the last time, General Cedras went into the military headquarters. This was the place where the coup was planned 3 years ago. The band arrived. The Americans had promised him that he could organize a dignified send-off for himself. US troops tried to control the crowd of President Aristide's supporters, but they were getting more excited by the minute. And by the time the general told them what they'd been waiting for, nobody in the crowd could even hear. Only the microphones picked up his statement that he would leave the country, so nobody could use his presence here as an excuse for violence.
The Americans now have to turn to the second phase of their mission, which is making this country safe for democracy. That's a long-term project, and its success is by no means certain. Plenty of the general supporters are still at large, and they all have their weapons.
Supporters of President Aristide now believe their time has come. General Cedras was driven away. His bodyguards fired into the air to disperse Aristide's people. On his way home, somebody lobbed a brick through his car window. This country is still unstable. Even without the general, there's a real risk of more violence. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Port-au-Prince.
A leading international bank behaved in a disgraceful and disreputable way because it knew that assets given as security against a loan to Robert Maxwell really belonged to the Maxwell pensioners. The allegations were made on the first day of a civil case at the High Court to try to recover up to £60 million which went missing from the funds. The result could affect more than 20,000 Maxwell pensioners whose future payments depend on additional money being recovered.
Jack Clark used to work at a printer's in Dunstable, paying into one of the pension funds looted in the Maxwell scandal. He does receive a pension, but like thousands of others, he lives in fear of the money running out.
I had to retire the girls, but even further to that now, through more and more pressure and the worry of not knowing whether you're going to get your pension slip through every month, has caused me to have a small heart attack.
This is the first case on behalf of the Maxwell pensioners to come to the High Court, today sitting in Chancery Lane. They're seeking to recoup more than £60 million used as security against a loan to Maxwell from Credit Suisse Bank.
The pension funds say that Credit Suisse either knew or should have known that it was taking pension fund assets as security for loans to other parts of the Maxwell Group.
Credit Suisse, which declined to be interviewed, maintains it's not liable. In a statement it says, the security it took for its loan is valid, having been taken in good faith and without knowledge of any impropriety. Opening today's case, lawyers for the pensioners said it was an extraordinary proposition that a bank needn't check the security it was offered against the loan, and described aspects of Credit Suisse's behaviour after Robert Maxwell's death as both disgraceful and disreputable. This case could be critical to hopes of recovering over £400 million for the pensioners. That's because the court's decision on bank liability could affect other cases pending against different banks and separate efforts to reach a worldwide voluntary settlement. Tessa Curtis, BBC News.
The number of British schoolchildren who suffer from asthma has doubled in 15 years. According to a survey by the National Asthma Campaign, a child is admitted to hospital with the condition every 10 minutes. Air pollution is known to aggravate the disease, but researchers are still unclear as to why it's on the increase.
2-year-old Joe Patura-Riley is one of an estimated 1 million children in Britain who suffer from asthma. He's now being treated with steroids, helping him do all the things other 2-year-olds do. But despite both his parents suffering from the condition, his first attack when he was just 7 months old came as a shock.
It was frightening in the sense that he couldn't catch his breath a lot of the time. He'd wake up coughing in the night. We ended up in hospital 5 times in his first year. I mean, sometimes by the time we got to hospital, he'd be turning blue around the lips.
The number of children with the disease is said to have doubled over the past 15 years. The National Asthma Campaign estimates one child is admitted to hospital every 10 minutes. It says early symptoms are sometimes difficult to spot and better training for health workers is essential. It also wants all first aid boxes in public places to carry an inhaler. Doctors have noted a worldwide rise in the numbers of people with the condition, but are unsure why that is.
Air pollution has been highlighted recently.
Brands, before they're allowed to buy organo